Hello, I'm Iain Jackson. I'm Professor of Architecture at the University of Liverpool and I'm a research lead. As a new supervisor, how much support should I give? General guidance or detailed feedback on all student writing? Is there a balance? Well, there has to be a balance. And of course, the kind of guidance you will give will depend on the student's progress at that time and where they're up to in the PhD process. So I would start off by giving much more detailed and structured guidance at the beginning of the PhD process. And this begins to shift at some point around year 2 or maybe at the start of year 3, when you have to give the student a bit more scope to follow their own agenda and their own writing schedule. This is really key. At this point, the student will stop seeking out frequent, regular meetings and might need a bit more space. So you have to strike this balance. And of course, each student in each project is different and you have to tailor your approach to supervision to those specific student needs. I would say start off with a much more structured and guided way to supervision. And then at some point the balance shifts and the student will back away from you or need a bit more space. And you should give them that. It's not necessarily that they're hiding or running away. So you still need to factor in regular meetings and catch-ups, even if it's just to say, how are things going? Nothing to report. But you still need to give the student that space to pursue their writing at that moment. How do you balance guiding the project to a good outcome with nurturing the independence of the student? This is really important, and it's similar to the first question in some ways. You have to allow the student to develop their own skills to become an independent researcher in their own right. And in order to do that, the student is going to have to take responsibility. They're going to have to take control of the project. They're going to have to direct the methodology. They're going to have to write up the results in a way that they find appropriate and fitting. And you have to give the student scope to do that. But equally, a good project is a completed project. A good PhD is one that's finished. So you have to make sure that if the student is veering too far off track, that you bring them back on course and explain why. Now, one of the ways to do that is to discuss the outcomes and various approaches you might take with the student to produce a kind of summary of what are the advantages or disadvantages and what's the impact of pursuing a particular path. If a student is adamant that they're going to go a particular route against your better judgment or advice, then of course they might do that and you might have to let them. Hindsight's wonderful too. Perhaps their ideas are better than yours. So you have to tread really carefully here. But ultimately, we have to make the student aware of how long's left on the project, what still needs to be done, and what's the best course of action to get it over the line and completed. Remember that your PhD thesis is not your entire life's work. It's a distinct, particular project that has to be completed within a specified time. Don't let it spill over. Don't spend unnecessary large amounts of time on something that could be done in a much quicker and more efficient way. So it's a great question and a difficult one to adequately answer. How do you manage being a researcher, academic and supervisor? It's a great question and it highlights one of the amazing things about academia and one of the most frustrating things about it too. You're pulled in several directions and in a way each one is a distinct role in its own right. You could easily fill your entire week on one of those aspects, whether it's pursuing research, creating brilliant teaching content, or what we call leadership and service. So making the university run, sorting out the administrative aspects of running a university, writing grant applications and mentoring colleagues and all these other things are really important. So each aspect or each role within academia will pull you at different times and at different moments. Obviously within the teaching weeks, your focus might be more geared towards teaching. In the weeks or the semesters where your teaching load is lighter, you can give greater emphasis to research. Or you might try and structure your week according to a particular pattern. So if your teaching is timetabled for particular days, you could use the other days to focus on research. You need to be disciplined. You need to be quite strict. Otherwise, one activity will bleed into another one. Or there might be certain moments of crisis that demand your immediate attention and focus that week. Different universities also have different policies and rules. So, for example, at research-intensive universities, you might have 40% of your time devoted to research, 40% to teaching and scholarship, and 20% towards leadership and administration. So you've got to try and be very strict with those time frames. If you have 40% for research, that's 2 days per week. Make sure you allocate 2 days per week purely for research, and you don't do anything else on those days. It's easier said than done. But if you can eliminate all of the tasks and just focus on your research for those 2 days, that's really important. Another technique I've used previously is to try and allocate a minimum 30 days writing per day, no matter what. And that's my first task of the day. And I'll sit down and just write or edit or craft ideas and work on various articles. 30 minutes a day seems like nothing, but over the course of a week and a month and a year, it quite quickly adds up to a substantial amount of time. Imagine if you'd been writing for 30 minutes every day for the last 5 years. You'd have an amazing body of work. So don't underestimate the small bits. Of course, you need to focus on the teaching, and that's crucially important that we do that. I really don't like academics who don't like teaching. It's unbelievable. So you've really got to make sure that when you are teaching for those 2 days, that you're entirely focused. But try and instill these boundaries so that your time is protected and you're able to give adequate attention and focus to each of these important activities. How much postdoctoral experience is required for being a PhD supervisor? There isn't a set amount of time required to post-PhD to becoming a supervisor. It's not about a time limit, it's more about your experience. And of course, you want to be confident that you're ready and fully equipped to supervise a PhD student. And that comes through experience of working on other research projects, experience of delivering research outputs like articles, books, films, whatever it is. Making sure that you've built up a strong network, making sure that you're familiar with the processes of grant writing and competitive bidding for resources, making sure that you've not just read or worked on one PhD, i.e. your own, so that you've got some other experience first. So I'd recommend you become a second supervisor or a third supervisor, or even ask a more experienced PhD supervisor if you can just join them. Join some of their supervisions for an afternoon, see how they do it, speak to people. Getting that mentorship and that assistance is crucial. I know when I started supervising my early PhDs, I worked with a much more experienced academic who was at the end of their career. And we'd often have a discussion after the supervisions about how we handled it, what the student needs, what we might do. And I still think about and refer to those meetings now. So I think that's a key aspect. It's not an easy job, and you want to make sure you're fully equipped. And of course, you can attend university training sessions. I'd recommend you do that as well. There's lots of great pedagogy on how to be a good PhD supervisor. You've got to follow that advice and stay up to speed with all the pedagogical advances and also your own university rules and regulations. There's codes of practice, and they're often a real mine of useful information and rules and regulations that we have to follow. What qualifications do you need to become a PhD supervisor? You don't need any specific qualifications. There are people who supervise PhDs who don't have a PhD, but that's quite rare these days. So most people will have the classic undergraduate degree, a master's, and then a PhD themselves. And they're the only kind of standard qualifications that most people will have. You might go on to have other teaching qualifications, higher education academy, and your university might offer some teaching qualifications too. There may be specific modules on postgraduate research supervision. So you might have those kind of qualifications. Equally, you need the experience. You need the experience of supervising, managing, and running research projects. You need experience of publishing, and ideally sitting in on a PhD Viva. You will have obviously sat on your own, but have you had permission to be an observer in another? Or maybe you could attend an open PhD Viva if that's possible. So yeah, they're the qualifications that you really want. You need that experience. Most of all, you need the enthusiasm, determination, passion, and commitment to see it through. What advice would you give to early career academics considering taking on their first PhD student? Well, it's one of the amazing things about being an academic. You get to work with new scholars, creating new knowledge and new subjects, advancing their field, advancing the discipline, creating impact, new products, and changing the way we think about society and our world. So it's amazing, and I would say go for it. It's a privilege, it's an honour, and good fun. And you get to meet wonderful people from all over the world and to discuss who we are as humans and what is truth and knowledge and ideas. So for an academic, it's amazing, and one of the most special and beautiful things about being an academic. But of course, it comes with great responsibilities. So only do it if you have time. You have to give it the required time. You have to invest in your PhD students. You have to want the best for them. They're not a source of cheap, free labour. They're not there to write your papers or do your hard graft in the laboratory or the field. So it's a wonderful thing to do, but it's not easy. Make sure you know about the regulations and the rules. Make sure you have a mentor yourself. Make sure you're adequately equipped and prepared to do it, and that you want to do it. You don't want to have a resentful relationship with your students. So you're going to have to allocate time in your calendar. You're going to have to allocate time for reading the students' work, thinking about them and their careers. How are you going to guide them, not only through the research, but also how to produce a thesis and how to write papers and share that knowledge at conferences. You're going to have to be their first point of contact at the university, dealing with all manner of problems. So if you're a people person as well as a science or research person, then it's great, and I'd encourage you to do it. Make sure you're prepared, make sure you have a mentor, and most importantly, make sure you recruit a student who closely aligns with your research interests and passions. Don't just take on a student for the sake of it on a rough alignment, or it might be interesting, and that's not going to be good enough. What are the biggest mistakes PhD students make early on? Well, mistakes are all part of life, and we have to make them. You have to make errors, and you have to do things to learn from the process. It's not always pleasant or helpful, but often it's necessary. And a lot of the mistakes I see are not geared around the research itself. The mistakes I see early on with PhD students are when the student tries to work full-time and do a PhD full-time. That's a huge mistake and never ends well. Another mistake is trying to treat the PhD as a program or a course that you can just do, rather than as being a proper researcher. So if you're just trying to jump through the hoops and get the PhD and turn up and hopefully pass the course, it doesn't work like that. You do have to write an original contribution to knowledge. You do have to do the research. And so having that mindset sometimes, sadly, creeps into it. But assuming you're entering a PhD with the right attitude, And the biggest mistakes are often, I find, when the student doesn't write early. So when you read an article, you should write about it. Just a paragraph, a few words, your thoughts. These quickly build up into very useful documents. But if you don't write from the very beginning, you will struggle to, one, get into the habit, and two, to learn the craft of writing. It's something that has to be practiced. It's not something that we have naturally within us. I certainly don't. You have to practice the art of writing. And that's one of the amazing things about a PhD. Not only do you learn to do the research and advance this knowledge, you also learn to be a good communicator. You learn to write well, and hopefully to present well, and to share your ideas and your passion and the impact of your work. So start writing early. That's one of the biggest mistakes. Another mistake is not conducting a thorough literature review. It might seem surprising, but some people try and skip over it, or they think that reading is a kind of luxury that they don't want to do. They just want to skim through. Allow yourself the time to read and understand the existing body of knowledge, because that's key to advancing your own brain, to learning about all this amazing research that's taken place before you started working on this topic, to learn from all these amazing scientists and researchers who existed before you. If you skip over that, or you devolve it to AI or something like that, you're missing a massive opportunity for growth. And that's a huge mistake that PhD students can make. What are the duties of a PhD supervisor? It's a very varied role. You might think it's purely about the science or the research or the data. It's not. Fundamentally, it's a role that involves mentorship and leadership. You're there to be a guide, a kind of critical friend. That's your key role. To make sure that the student knows what they're doing and when, to give them advice on their methods and approaches and areas that they need to work on, to provide quick, useful feedback on their drafts, and to help them craft the right approach to their research project. So the role or the duties of the PhD supervisor change over time. In the early stages, it's very much about creating the project, understanding the existing literature and helping the student write the literature review, which is never easy. Then moving on to the methods. How are we going to do it? What are the limitations? What are the delimitations? How are we going to form the project into something that can be completed within 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the timetable is, in a meaningful way, and to produce results that we can verify and that are credible, and hopefully advance our understanding and create a change. So you're trying to foster this. Your other duties are to make sure the project is running on time. So is it being written up? Is it going to meet the end date? Is it going to be written to the right standard? Is it going to have enough data? Is the flow and structure and composition of the thesis appropriate? So you're kind of providing an overview or an oversight on all these areas. You're an editor, you're a mentor, you're a guide, you're a counsellor sometimes. You're a networker, you're trying to help the student advance their career. Sometimes you need to be quite firm. One of your duties is to provide difficult feedback. We have to do that in an appropriate way. You have to give feedback that's supportive and helpful. It might not always be easy, and the student may not always be receptive to it. So you have to think about how you're going to be a good communicator and a good leader. It's easy to dismiss the work and say it's not good enough, or it's nonsense or rubbish or whatever. That's completely inappropriate. How can we give robust and useful advice whilst advancing the project and making sure that the student is learning? So you've got all these various aspects of producing the thesis and providing the wisdom to get it done on time. Other roles might involve examining other PhD dissertations. So you might be asked to examine other students' work to make sure that PhDs are being completed to the right standard and that the work from one university is comparable to the work in another and so on. So that's another one of your roles. You'll also be helping students to share their knowledge, help advising them on which articles, which journals to approach, which conferences to go to, and so on. And also the post-PhD period. You're there as a long-term mentor. The student finishes, they don't just vanish, they often stay in touch. So I write references, I think about my students' work, I try to help them, whether they're in academia or they've moved into industry as well. How do I become an external supervisor? Well, this can mean two different things. It can mean becoming an external examiner. So an external examiner is someone who's appointed to examine the thesis. This is normally by invitation, and it'll depend on your reputation and your contacts and prestige in the field. So you'll just get an email one day and you'll be invited to become an external examiner. You're there to do three things really. One, to check that it's the student's own work. Secondly, to assess that it's an original contribution to knowledge. And finally, to think about whether parts of the thesis are publishable. So that's the role of the external examiner. An external supervisor can sometimes be a specialist appointment where you're brought in to offer some core advice to a student that may not exist within that institution. So I've been invited to only do this on one occasion, where another university appointed me on a part-time role to supervise one of their students. Or alternatively, you could be an external supervisor if you're collaborating on a grant with another university, for example. What common mistakes should new supervisors try to avoid? Well, it's likely you're going to make many mistakes as a supervisor and as a new supervisor. It's a difficult role, as I just outlined, and every project is bespoke. And of course, every student is unique. So you're always learning. You're never repeating the same program. You're always responding to the unique and individual requirements of the student and the project. So just be aware of that. I think one of the biggest mistakes new supervisors make is overloading the students too quickly. You're enthusiastic, you can't wait for the student to get started on the project, and there's a huge kind of brain dump of everything they need to know, of maybe your past 10 years of experience and ideas and problems that you encountered, and you just want the student to do well. You kind of overwhelm them and dump all this stuff onto them in one go. It's overwhelming for the student. Try and break it down, structure your supervisions. You might say, okay, we're going to do 6 supervisions and they're going to cover the 6 areas of the thesis and doing a PhD. So we're going to start off, we're going to do a supervision session on the literature review. The next one will be on methods. The next one will be on your data set and how we might interpret it and so on. We're going to think about how we might target certain conferences in year 2, because you kind of need to plan ahead. You're thinking a year ahead all the time. And then finally, the dissertation. So what's it going to look like? What's going to be the flow and the structure? I always end every supervision meeting with the same question. How many words have you written? When is the submission date? So we've always got those 2 key elements in our mind at the end of every supervision, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to write a thesis. We have to be aware of how the completion of it, where we're up to, and when is it going to happen. So that would be my advice to new supervisors. What is it like working at the University of Liverpool? Well, I've worked there full time for the last 15 years. So I've found it to be a really interesting and creative place. I'm based in the School of Architecture. It's one of the oldest schools of architecture in the UK. It's got fascinating colleagues doing some really interesting work. And I found it's given me a lot of freedom to pursue my research projects, to write fascinating grant applications, and to collaborate with people in Ghana, Nigeria and India and beyond. So I found it to be a great place to work. My office is based on Abercrombie Square, overlooking a lovely Georgian garden. I have access to the resources that I need, and I'm able to develop interesting projects and to recruit some great PhD students from across the world: Nigeria, Ghana, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, the States, and of course the UK. So it's been a fascinating experience, and I found it really rewarding and good fun. What is your favourite part of being a PhD supervisor? My favourite part is seeing new knowledge being created. So these big discoveries, these new advances, but also the small advances, the small steps, they're often quite fascinating. And when a new archive is unearthed, or new material comes out of an old archive, it's really extraordinary, very exciting, and good fun to be a part of that. When a student bursts into your office and says, I've just found this new document, or I've just realised this, or I've just identified a new area that I'd like to look at, I think this could be significant. Those are the wonderful moments. So yeah, I really enjoy that aspect of it. And equally, seeing the thesis emerge. It didn't exist before. This knowledge, this data wasn't there. And gradually, over the course of months and years, the chapters get written, the argument evolves and emerges, and we start to see a body of knowledge under formation. We start to see this thesis gradually come to life. And then we see the student grow in confidence and to present their work and to defend it and to take on new ideas as they discuss it and share. That's quite extraordinary to be a part of that process. And of course, seeing a student finish the work, the end point's always there. We want to get it done. We want to move on. So yeah, seeing the student grow, seeing their confidence in life and transformation, it's great to be part of it, and that's why I do it. What is the most difficult part of being a PhD supervisor? Well, I hope I've enthused you into all the good bits as well. It is a difficult role, or rather it's a challenging role, and I think that's a difference. It's problem solving, and it's a project-based work, so it has an end. It's not a never-ending task that repeats itself, and I quite like that. But the ending is also one of the most difficult bits of PhD supervision, because you're just getting used to working with the student, and they're now competent and a bona fide, legitimate researcher in their own right by the end of the process, and then it finishes, and they often move on to other things. So it's bittersweet. I always find that difficult. I just wish there was kind of a bonus year at the end of PhDs where you could just work together on a project as equals, and there's nothing stopping you doing that, of course. But it would be nice if it was built into the process. I find that other difficulties are around funding, so they're external to the PhD process. The research and the scholarship itself is normally quite good fun. The difficulties arise from funding, getting funding for amazing PhD students who can't get support. You want to take them on, they're amazing. You want them to join your research lab, but they haven't got the funding. That's just heartbreaking, really. Getting funding for travel, field work, conferences, you spend almost as much time bidding for funds as you do on the actual research. That's just part of the nature of the beast, and we're certainly more fortunate than most. But that's a difficult and frustrating bit. Other difficult parts, or the most difficult parts, can be around, again, quite pragmatic things. Finding suitable external examiners, because you don't get paid very much to do this, so it's kind of you're doing it as a favour. It's not good enough, really. The universities should adequately pay for their external examiners so we can recruit the absolute best people, or it would make that easier. So that's quite frustrating. And I think the other difficulties are around just the frustrations about writing and clarity and making sure that the student grasps the project and can explain it well and spends that time learning the craft of writing, as I previously alluded to. What qualities do supervisors most value in potential PhD students? Well, I value curiosity. I value students who have a purpose. So there's a reason behind why they want to do the PhD. They know that. They know the why. They know why they want to do it. It's important to them. So the research isn't just being done for its own sake. It's not being done purely because they want to do a PhD for some reason. But the topic itself has a resonance and an importance and a significance to them. I find that really important and quite curious as well. Of course, you don't want that connection to somehow distort or impact the research. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is that the student has something more than just a desire to do another qualification or to run away from another situation or part of their life. But there's a real curiosity and drive. They want to know the answers. They have this kind of insatiable desire to find out more. And they're genuinely intrigued or confused or disturbed or amazed by the world that they live in. And they just have to pursue the research. They just have to know the answer. They have to have that kind of drive to them. If you don't, you'll really struggle. The PhD will quickly become irritating and incredibly difficult. They're all difficult. So you need something that will drive you on, that purpose, that sense of mission. So I'm looking for that quality. Of course, I'm looking for students who are intelligent and have got good early degrees and relevant masters, ideally. Or they might have been working in other areas. They might be a mature student who's got lots of other experiences, and that's valid as well. So I've worked with many mature students, mature PhD students. Some have done it as retirement projects even. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. Every student will be different. But they all come with that curiosity and that drive. They also come, or hopefully have the ability to express their ideas in a coherent way. They're able to share what it is they want to know and why. They're not always amazing authors or fantastic writers at that stage. That's something you learn, but they're able to convey something about their work. I think you have to be able to do that well. So I'm looking for those qualities. And I'm also looking for students who I can work with. I don't want to be working with somebody over a long period. It's 3 years at least. We both have to invest our time and energy and resources into the project. So I'm looking for someone who I can get along with. Someone who's going to be interesting, good fun, who has a position, who challenges me, who wants to change the world in some way, albeit a small way through the PhD. And that's about impact. So I'm looking for students who don't want to just create knowledge or science for its own sake, but they see it within a bigger picture. They see it as being to bring out a transformation in the world. Through policy or through culture or through a small society or even through a building or a street. They have that sense of mission and purpose.